And so I came to this place from my business where I realized I'm the bottleneck. I was working stupid hours. And a big part of my pride was the fact that I would put in these big
Yep.
hours, but you're not scalable. And I think this is, the E Myth by Michael Gerber. He talks about this. I know Dan Sullivan talks about this as well. He says, most entrepreneurs can think about doubling their revenue. They can comprehend that they could actually do the work. The real challenge is imagine 10 times. And 10 times means you have to figure out a solution outside of yourself. So I worked with my coach, and at the time, we came up with a principle called the 131 principle. And it's something that I implemented at that time that made a massive.
This is the Business of Advice podcast, where we help good advisors become great business owners. Today, we are joined by a good personal friend of mine who also happens to be a brilliant entrepreneur, leader, husband, father. Brad Pedersen is currently the co-founder and chairman of Open Mind Development Corporations, but he has a long history in business. More importantly, I think we are recording this just a few days after Brad and I spent almost 4 days together. The two of us have been in a small mastermind group that you've heard me talk about before with 10 other business leaders for almost a decade now. So I've had a front row seat to his journey, and I'm excited to have him sharing it with you all today. So Brad, buddy, good to see you again here just a couple days after we spent some time together, but welcome to the Business of Advice podcast.
Cody, so great to be here. And we've done some pretty fascinating life together. Most recently, getting to be city slickers.
Yeah. That was not fun. You were having more fun than me. My horse did not like me. So
yeah, you had a cranky horse. Mine wanted to go and wanted to get rodeo going, but we were able to manage to rein that in. But it was a good time.
Yeah. It was fun. It's, I think a big part of our relationship has been that group. And I know I mentioned this, we've known each other for a while, so I've got to see maybe a little bit more of your journey or just hear it as you've gone through it. Most of our audience will not have heard that. This will be their first time meeting you. So will you just start by taking us through your entrepreneurial journey? And I know we'll probably get into some of the highs and lows, but you can even hit them at a high level here at the beginning.
Yeah. That's great. And by the way, you have like one of the best narrator voices ever. You should actually maybe do announcing at games or something like that, because that intro, I wish I could can it and use it for all my intros going forward. It was perfect.
Well, we'll cut it and send it to you, buddy.
Thank you. Appreciate the support. Look, I tell people my story is a series of happy accidents. What I'm doing today, I honestly couldn't have imagined when I first started out. I'm a kid from the prairies of Canada. And where I grew up, basically the two things that you did were you were either in the oil business or you're in agriculture. And actually, my family did neither of those. I came from a line of chiropractors. In fact, my father was a chiropractor. My grandfather and grandmother were chiropractors. And my great-grandfather was the first chiropractor in Denmark. So I was told since I was a young lad that I was going to grow up and be a chiropractor, just like my parents were. But crazy things happen. I, at a very young age, showed lots of entrepreneurial tendencies, and I was always curious, a bit mischievous. I tended to get in trouble, but I'd say good trouble, like never anything that was really too harmful, but I did get the strap multiple times when I was in school. And I think that kind of just speaks to like, pushing the boundaries and the possibilities just to see where the limits were. So anyways, I went to school to be a chiropractor, and I took a year off between the time that I had finished pre-chiropractic and I was going to go to chiropractic college. And the reason I took that year off is because, well, I met the best thing that ever happened to me. I met my wife, and she was not my wife at the time, but she was the girl that was going to be my wife. And she had a year to do her final degree. So I hung out for a year. And somebody with entrepreneurial tendencies sitting around for a period of time will either get themselves in trouble or get themselves in business, and maybe both. And I was always a very playful person, big kid. I've been accused of it. My wife still accuses me of it. And I read a story about a kid who invented a toy, and it was kind of a rags to riches story. I was curious about the product. I bought it. I played with it. I thought it was pretty cool. And then I had this idea, maybe I could sell these. And I put together a business plan, and that business plan, they accepted just because they were as naive about Canada as I was about the toy business. And it was just kind of these very humble beginnings from the basement of our, a duplex that we lived in, to get us started in the toy business. And that business ended up growing to become one of the largest toy distribution companies in Canada. But unfortunately ran into some challenges, and I had to file bankruptcy in that business, not once but twice, because I'm a slow learner. And that led me to then start a new business in toys where I made toys, and I scaled that company ultimately to a place where I had an exit. It was a sudden exit, soft landing. And we'll talk probably about that
Yep.
as we go through this journey. And finally, that's led to this very circuitous path of landing where I'm building these sustainability businesses, where it's awesome to be able to focus on the triple bottom line, knowing that you're creating products that benefit both people and the planet. And yeah, that's kind of the Cliff Notes version of where it started to where we are today.
And yeah, we will, just because I know, we'll be able to have some meaningful conversation around some of the things that have happened in those, and even the new businesses, which I think have some huge upside. But going through that now, where you're now on your third business, or I guess you could say maybe third and fourth, that you have scaled, are there some tips that you have for any entrepreneur that's looking to scale their business, just as you reflect back on, like, hey, here's some of the common things that you're going to have to do to scale?
Yeah, so many. And I tell people I do not have an MBA from a notable university, but I have a PhD and DUMB from the School of Hard Knocks. My education has come from just learning hard things the hard way. But in general, success is a sucky teacher. We don't tend to learn a lot from succeeding. And I've come to learn the reason that is that, when you fail, it should force you to pause. And when you pause, to reflect. And if you take the time to unpack the lessons from that, you can then choose again, and you can hopefully do it better and stronger the next time around. So chapter 1 of my book actually talks a lot about this, because I open right up and I talk about my first and second bankruptcy and kind of what were the key learnings. And I found out, the hard way, first of all, that a little bit of ego can lead to a lot of overhead, and you start making decisions because you believe you're that good. And those, what I've come to learn is that pride is the beginning of when a business starts to become unstable and eventually can capitulate. In fact, I think it was Jim Collins, when he wrote the book How the Mighty Fall, he talked about this pattern of, he'd done all these patterns about how businesses become great, and he reverse engineered it. And the number one characteristic of all those companies was hubris, pride. Mm-hmm. So I definitely can see a pattern of this young, whippersnapper kid who'd built these companies, and I had, been celebrated in these magazines, and I was on the Profit 100 list 5 years in a row, which are the 100 fastest growing companies in Canada. I was nominated for Ernst & Young Entrepreneur of the Year award, and life was good. And I started to make some reckless and careless decisions. And I would say that I learned up close and personal that most entrepreneurs don't starve from lack of opportunity. They choke on biting off more than they can chew.
Yeah.
And as I started to build success in one thing, I started to try and launch this, and I launched another business, and I tried to launch a new division. And it was like all of it was going to work. I had the Midas touch. It was all going to work. And indirectly, I found out that I had created constraints on my business in 3 areas: my people, my systems, and my capital. And they ultimately became the flanking maneuvers that forced us to, well, didn't force us. If you aren't reinventing those things, it will come to a sad end, as I experienced up close and personal.
It's one of the things you said there that I see some, and I'd never tied it back into ego or pride, but it is too much overhead. I see business owners who just, it's one of the things, a few friends that I have that I've seen it where I'm like, one of the things we've always tried to do is only spend the money when we had it and when we needed it. But I never tied it back to maybe ego. It's like, hey man, the bigger we get, the more successful we appear and we look. And were there areas where you saw yourself maybe over leveraging, or that you were investing or spending too much money?
Yes, many.
Yeah, those 3. Yeah.
Well, okay, particularly it depends on the type of company you come from, but ultimately a sustainable business is sustainable because it's profitable, particularly if you want to be enduring and durable as a company. And if you come from a bootstrapping background, which I did, that you kind of eat what you kill, right? You didn't have venture backing, so you have to basically generate the cash flow and the profits to make it work. Part of it is what we think is success. And what I find is a lot of founders focus on the wrong vanity metrics. There's this wise adage that top line's vanity, bottom line's sanity, cash flow's reality. And when you think about it from the perspective of a business, it's about making decisions that are going to protect your cash because it's the lifeblood of your business. And it's really easy to rationalize, which, if you break that down, telling rational lies
Yeah.
about what you think is an investment that's going to help you grow sales top line. But if you don't actually plan it through and the cash implications of it, ultimately it can be the thing that sabotages your business. And as an example, I had a toy distribution company. That was my first business. And, that model is you buy toys from a factory in China, you ship it on the water for 30 days, you put it in a warehouse, you ship it to customers, and they take up to 180-day terms. So, growing the top line of that business requires a tremendous amount of cash because of the cash cycle, the cash
Yep.
conversion cycle
It's
is so
huge.
long, massive. And so that you just have to know that going in that, that business model, if you want to grow it, scale it, you better make sure that you're reinventing the cash available and that you're inspecting what you're expecting in terms of the profitability to maintain it. And we found out the hard way that you can get upside down your balance sheet when you don't have that right.
One of the things we're seeing a lot is our advisors, or it's a theme right now, they're either purchasing other advisors' practices, or we are seeing some advisors who are selling their practices also. You have a situation where you merged with a company. I won't name the company.
Okay.
And I know you learned some lessons through that, but could you maybe just talk a little bit about that situation and maybe what you learned merging with another company and any advice you'd have for either side of that equation, right? The advisors that are acquiring a business or maybe the ones that are selling to somebody else?
Yeah. Well, again, kind of a painful story, but again, these are wisdom from my wounds. So you can
Yeah.
learn some of the benefit from my mistakes. Look, when I brought in capital, so just to back up to explain what happened so we can unpack the lessons from it. I bankrupted the company. I had to bring in outside capital to try and fix it. They required us to restructure it, which was what the bankruptcy came from, in order to build up the balance sheet to start again. But we should have actually been looking at the business model to make sure the model was good, and that model ultimately wasn't good. So that business died. I started a new company with the same investors. And here's the reality: if you raise money in your business at the beginning, you've agreed to sell the company. Okay. There's going
Yep.
to be some kind of liquidity event that they're expecting to have out of that situation at some time down the road. So people celebrate raising money. Quite frankly, I think it's a massive liability because if
Mm-hmm.
you have people you're responsible for repaying with a return. They don't just want the money back, they want a return on the money as well. So fast forward to I start that company, it works out. We've learned from our past and we've scaled this business and we've become one of the top toy companies in Canada. But now my investors are saying, hey, we need an exit. And we had tried to sell the company. I was still interested in going forward, but we tried to sell their stake out of the company. And in the end, it just became kind of challenging. We couldn't find term sheets that made sense. So where we landed on is, hey, instead of us selling the company, what if we merge the company with a similar company, and the two companies will be able to optimize their operations. We can go to private equity, and through that process, we can actually then create some liquidity for the investors and continue to operate it. See, it seemed like a win-win situation.
Yeah.
What I've since come to learn is there is no such thing as merger. There is only acquisition. And what that means is that there is going to be one culture that prevails. And, on paper, these things looked like they were compatible. But they absolutely weren't. So there's kind of three key lessons I learned from this, or principles that I would tell your listeners. Number one, fit over functionality. So on paper, it can look perfect. It looks like it makes sense. You guys are bringing the companies together. You're going to reduce overheads. You're going to optimize things. You're going to have higher revenues, and it's going to work. However, if you don't have the right culture and you don't have the right foundation to work from, the people aren't going to work well together. And the business of business is people. If you don't have people who want to rally around the same vision and mission and live by the same values, it's like when I was a kid, we used to mix ant colonies, red ants with black ants. It never worked out. They didn't get along. Right. So that's kind of the metaphor. So that was the first thing. The second is the importance of trust. And so myself and the other co-founder, we liked each other. I respected him. But at the end of the day, we weren't willing to get into meaningful conflict. There was no base of trust that gave us permission that we'd push each other and challenge each other. Instead, we just kind of grin and nod and just like, okay, everything's fine, and we'll just work through these challenges. But we weren't willing to go in and do the deep work that was required to really get the best commitments and ultimately the outcomes we were looking for. And finally, don't ignore and avoid. And my thought process is this, is that I, for the longest time, was avoiding dealing or confronting the brutal facts, what was going on. I was more motivated by the financial outcomes than I was about the actual quality of life. And so we had built up this artificial harmony that the organization was actually being carelessly navigated through. Because if the leaders of the company are not getting along and they're not willing to speak into it, now you're risking the company by not having those conversations that will allow people to get to a much better direction outcome, because we're beating it up and looking at it from different angles. So look, the two most important decisions you're going to make in life is who do you marry and who you get in business with. And those two decisions you need to take with great caution, because if you get it wrong, the quality of your life, the most important piece of your life being the time you have, will be highly influenced by that decision.
You know, something that I've seen, and just because you and I have talked about this a little, and you talked about it there, I've seen a lot of this where our advisors will acquire another advisory practice, and they have these intentions of keeping that advisor on, and very rarely has that worked out. And something you just said there is there's two things, right? It's a different culture, but you're also like, you have two A-type personalities that have been used to making all the decisions. You know, they don't agree, they don't get along, they don't do it the same way. How would you have done that different? Would you have just walked away from the company out of the gate, or like, as you've reflected back on that, because when we first met, I think you were kind of right in the middle of going through that. Would you have done that differently in any way, shape, or form?
Yeah, I wouldn't have done the deal.
Yeah.
It just ultimately, the most important, business is hard, and your odds of success are low. Mortality rate's really high. And there's people who want you to go out of business. And so with knowing that that's true, why would you want to put any risk into the dynamic by cultures that clash, that don't get along? Because it's already hard enough. You need to be able to go into the trenches with people who you're arm in arm with, and you're fighting the good fight alongside people who are motivated by the same things, that believe in the same principles, who are trying to achieve the same outcomes. If not, without that baseline of trust, you can't build anything meaningful. So that would have been my advice to myself, is that I was motivated by the money without thinking through the meaning of how we could build something that would ultimately last. And, it created a sudden exit. I was ultimately fired by the board because they saw the two CEOs in conflict, and they thought that was not obviously sustainable or good for the business. So it was a sudden exit from a company I co-founded, but fortunately it was a soft landing, as it provided financial freedom as a result. Unintended consequence, of course, but gave me options and optionality to pursue other things.
Okay, we're going to jump into your book here in a second. Before we do that, scaling, one of the things that tends to happen a lot in scaling is you hire more people. And a lot of times, if maybe the biggest challenge in scaling that I've seen with people is the entrepreneur founder so used to being intimately involved and making so many decisions, but as you get more and more people, you can become the bottleneck. You have this approach when you were scaling teams, and I would say it's like you realized everyone kept coming to you for the decision or direction, was creating this bottleneck. You have this 1-3-1 rule. Will you just talk about how you implemented that to kind of remove yourself from being I guess you'd say, the decision bottleneck in the business?
Yeah. Look, I call it the Wizard of Oz phenom. In the beginning, it's people are coming to you to have the problem solved. And initially it's empowering because, wow, you have the answers. But eventually it's draining because you have the answers, and you don't get what you want, you get what you tolerate. So if you tolerate that all the major decisions have to land on you to make the solution, the thing you're going to be on the side of that is you're going to find that your company is not scalable. And so I came to this place in my business where I realized I'm the bottleneck. I was working stupid hours. And a big part of my pride was the fact that I would put in these big
Yep.
hours, but you're not scalable. And I think this is, the E-Myth by Michael Gerber. He talks about this. I know Dan Sullivan talks about this as well. He says, most entrepreneurs can think about doubling their revenue. They can comprehend that they could actually do the work. The real challenge is imagine 10 times. And 10 times means you have to figure out a solution outside of yourself. So I worked with my coach, and at the time, we came up with a principle called the 131 principle. And it's something that I implemented at that time that made a massive impact in terms of the quality of my life as well as the development of my leaders.
Yeah.
And it's something that I use to this day. And the idea is this: if you have one problem you're bringing forward, you need to have three possible solutions and then one recommendation. And it really forces your leaders to do the prep work, to do the thinking, to do the ideation around what is it that what is the problem specifically, succinctly, and what are the three things I've thought through. And from that, here's my recommendation. And what it does, it moves you from being the author to the editor. You still reserve the right that you can go in and make subtle changes to it. But at the end of the day, you now have been freed up and you've empowered your leaders to do the thinking that will be scalable for the enterprise.
Yeah, there's two victories in that, right? The one is that you don't have to make every decision, right? And it's so easy early on because you do know it instinctually and you can make those decisions. But like you said, you can't scale that. But the I guess you'd say hidden benefit is you're developing those people that work for you, right? You're getting them to start thinking critically about the business, and over time can direct that. I've said this a lot, even in our own business. One of the biggest changes I've tried to make is like I meet with my direct reports every week. We have kind of a standing meeting we do. And, for years, they would bring problems and ask me for what we wanted to do. The biggest is me just asking them, what would you do? And that change is, it's freed up. It's allowed us to scale, but it's also empowered them in a way that they really start thinking critically about the business also.
That's, and you have a big organization, you have more people than I do. But as I think about now, we're in hundreds of employees, and I know you have several hundred employees. The only way to build it and maintain it and scale it consistently is to have your team empowered to make decisions. And I think it was Michael Gerber who said that if a business depends on you, you don't have a business. You've got a job.
Yep.
And it's the worst job in the world is you're working for a lunatic.
Yeah. Maybe a high paying job, but you got to work for someone crazy. So, okay, let's talk about your book. I know you referenced it. Startup Santa is out, so people should go pick this up. Maybe the simple question, how'd you come up with the title, Startup Santa?
Well, first of all, I'm from the North. I live in Canada, so I'm the closest akin to Santa Claus. And for 30 years of my life, I was responsible for bringing joy and happiness to kids around the world on Christmas morning. The book takes. So that's explanation of the name, and really the idea behind the book is, I actually didn't really want to write this book. It was. There's a couple things around that. If you've written a book, you understand that it takes a lot of time. It seems very daunting. And the thing I know about myself is that I'm a good starter. I'm a good finisher. It's the in-betweens, that messy middle that I'm not good at. And second, I was kind of like, the world's already pretty noisy. There's a lot of thought leaders and ideas out there. There's nothing new under the sun. So why do I need to contribute to the conversation? So where I landed is I was going to do a memoir and just capture the adventures, particularly through difficulties of building businesses, and just make sure that I had fully unpacked those lessons. And a couple of things that were surprising as I started going through and writing, I found that it was very healing. Like there'd be moments I'd be writing, I'd be in tears. I just was something that I felt really emotional about, because I was sort of closing loops and connecting things and correlating ideas that I'd left kind of unopened from just living fast. And I've since come to learn that we don't learn from what happens. We learn from reflecting on it and taking the time to unpack it. And there's something called narrative therapy that comes as a result of that. And then second is that I had some friends who said, hey, here you're writing a book. You should let me read a chapter or so. So I started letting them read chapters, and I had a number say, hey, it would be very selfish of you if you did not release this to the world. There's people who are going to benefit from reading your story and benefiting from the lessons learned. So that became kind of the impetus to say, okay, I'm going to launch a book that's more than a memoir. And the idea was inspired by toys because I came from that world. So every chapter features an iconic toy and some of the history of that toy, what the toys teach us, because toys are involved in play, and play is about developing as humans, and then unpacking the lessons of what we're being taught through that toy, and then some story from my life, which is typically something that didn't go well, because that's what we tend to learn, and then tying it together. And that's how each chapter kind of flows along.
Yeah, that's cool. I want to dig into a few just things in the book that we pulled out, but you talked about this earlier, cash, and that being a big one. And we talk all the time to our advisors about this concept. We call it your cash runway, right? Like, how long can your business go? What's that runway where you have enough cash to maintain? And I think that's just a huge part. I know the kind of change for you was Walmart stopped doing business with you, and you took, I think your reflection time, like you said, is like, I don't want to be cash strapped ever again, that allows us not to scale. Just maybe talk through, I know you talked a little bit about cash at the beginning, but how did you change your approach to scaling? How did you start looking at cash and finances after that?
Yeah, don't run out of it.
It's a good one. That's simple advice. Very good advice.
Simple advice. Yeah. Yeah. That when I said that, top line's vanity, bottom line sanity, cash flow's reality. Look, here is kind of the benefits from going through that difficult period. When we tripped the first company, we tripped the covenants, went into special loans. One of the things that special loans forced on us was a 13-week cash flow. That was incredibly difficult. There's a lot of rigor required to actually do the numbers on 13 weeks, but having 90 days out to view where your cash trajectory is incredibly helpful. And it's something that we use to this day. So even though that happened in 2006, here we are in 2023, and we're still applying a 13-week cash flow. Secondly, is this idea that there's these flanks within your business that need to be constant, or potential flanks that need to be reinvented. And one of them is cash. And I would tell you, I have, so Jim Collins calls it productive paranoia. I think paranoia is not a great word. It means irrational fear. So I call it active uneasiness. So I'm actively uneasy that I never, ever want to run out of cash and be in a position where I get tripped into special loans and or make very compromising decisions for the health of the enterprise. So in order to do that, we're supposed to grow companies. Human beings are designed to grow. Like trees grow to the sky. You plant grass, it'll even grow through asphalt. It's amazing. Things want to grow. So humans are no different. We're supposed to grow. But there's a difference between growth at all costs and healthy growth. And it's understanding that when you're growing at all costs, you literally are risking the enterprise and risking I'd even say the health of the people within the enterprise. So not only health of the company, but health of the people inside the company. But the rate of growth that you choose is got to be correlated to the money planning ahead of it. And you need to make sure that you are planning ahead of time how you're going to have the funding available to make it work. Not all business models are equal. Like I explained, my distribution company had a massive strain on cash.
Yeah.
Our current companies are direct to consumer companies. We get paid when we sell, so we have less strain. In fact, we've created a negative cash conversion cycle. We get paid ahead of even when we have to pay our factories, which is a pretty awesome change of events from where I used to be. But at the same time, we have this active uneasiness about making sure we're looking ahead and having the resources in place ahead of the needs of the company. And I would tell you, even right now, I'm in a fundraising process. We have cash in the bank. Things look great, but I am in the active process right now because I can see that, there's some tumult in the market and uneasiness out there. And I want to make sure that, when the music stops, we're not left without a chair.
Makes sense. And no, that's great advice. And I'll just kind of a shameless plug for advisors that listen to this with us. Like we have this whole cash runway tool that if you haven't seen or used that, you should just call your VP here and they'll get it to you, because that's the most important thing we talk about is you never want to be in a position where you're strained on cash, right? It just limits your opportunities and your options. So, okay, let's talk. You have another section that is titled "Slow is Smooth, Smooth is Fast." What does that mean to you? Do you have an example of how you've embraced this, like either personally or within your companies?
Yeah, this is actually in the first chapter, which, by the way, people can get free if they go to the website. But we talk about the GI Joes in that chapter, and I talk about kind of the modern versions of GI Joes being the Navy SEALs. And this is a philosophy that they embrace. And there's actually it's a part of a two-part philosophy that are co-dependent with each other. So there's a few ideas to unpack. The first is there should be creative tension between the idea that we need to be growing and advancing, however, never so fast that we leave ourselves at the risk of a flanking maneuver. So when the SEALs are advancing in the battlefield, they never leave their backside exposed, right? They're constantly making sure that they've got coverage from the backside. And it's the same in business. Like as you think about it with business, and I said the three flanking, in my experience, the three areas you get flanked are the people, your systems break, and or you don't have enough cash.
Yep.
And you want to be setting a pace that's sustainable to ensure that your team, you're not getting too far ahead of your team, and that also the decisions are not too erratic, which is the second principle, which is slow is smooth, smooth is fast. And the idea that when we make decisions in business at the beginning, particularly when we're generalists, we can make lots of fast decisions because we're being very nimble and we're taking the information and moving quickly with it. But as we get larger and as we have more people in the organization, it's better to make less decisions, but better quality decisions, because there's a lot of whipsaw that happens within an organization if you're making fast, erratic decisions. So when we slow down to make better quality decisions, we actually create more speed for the enterprise because we're not creating a lot of whip and drag within the organization afterwards. So giving examples of where we recently had that happen. So we launched Lomi, which is our electronic kitchen composter, through a crowdfunding campaign. It was an incredible hit. We sold almost $10 million worth. And in crowdfunding, that is like a unicorn. That rarely happens. In fact, it's the largest clean tech crowdfunding campaign of all time. And because of all the noise we created around that, we had a lot of demand from retailers who were saying, hey, we want to bring this into our stores. So this was April 2021. We started shipping the product in 22. We had retailers who were coming looking for the product. But then we started to see some headwinds in the marketplace. We were just coming out of COVID. Consumer products were starting to slow down. We started hearing that there was excess inventories in the market, particularly around home and home appliances, and that there was massive markdowns happening. We as a company made the decision to forego the revenue, even though there were some nice juicy orders that were sitting out there that would have been really tempting to actually pluck and take and say, hey, this is going to grow a revenue. Because our concern was we would ship that into the marketplace, it'd be caught up in the maelstrom of markdowns, and suddenly we've got a product and that's been compromised based on a value proposition. So again, it was a combination of like, we wanted to advance, but we also made sure that there's no flanking movement there. And then we just made better quality decisions instead of actually going for the first opportunity. We slowed down to make a better quality decision that I think has made it that brand, our brand, more aspirational and actually more sought after today.
That's cool. You know, I got similar advice. It's the benefit of this group of the 11 of us, even though we call ourselves the Dirty Dozen, there's only 11. But, you know, I remember Dave Liniger, and this is almost 10 years ago now, telling me I was, lamenting or a little frustrated that it felt like in our organization, things were taking so much longer to decide on and move forward and do, and more people weighing in. And I'll never forget him telling me this, and I'm setting this up for advice I got from you also. He said, yeah, dummy, that's because there's a lot more risk. It should take more time, in kind of his direct way that he says it. But he said it very clearly. He's like, hey, Cody, when you're a startup, like, make all the fast decisions you want. You have nothing to lose, right? But he's totally. Like, now you have a business that employs, at the time it was probably 200 people, and you have a lot of people, a lot of advisors that are counting on you. Like, you should slow down and think through the potential negative consequences of the decisions that you make. And you shouldn't be rushing to make like quick, fast decisions. He's like, that doesn't mean you don't want to, be a fast adopter or adjust, but he's like, you shouldn't make decisions anything like you made them when you were a startup, which is very similar to that. So I just think for any entrepreneur, we like to make decisions fast. It's part of what we enjoy, but being thoughtful of where you're at in your business and what you have to lose, I guess, and making wiser decisions around that's a big thing. So yeah. I set that up a little bit to talk about the value of this group and the wisdom that I've been able to get out of it that we've used in our business. You shared something at one of our very first meetings that we were together, and I've used this. I've had to say this with our team 100 times since then, and it was a saying that you had in manufacturing, which was shoot bullets before you shoot cannonballs, Will
Hmm.
you explain that philosophy behind the approach? Because it's been a game changer for us, and I may share some of the ways we use it. But I just love you to talk about it, from the manufacturing side.
Yeah, look, I can't take all the credit for that. That's actually something I learned from Jim Collins, but certainly I'm glad it's made impact for you
Yeah.
because it was very impactful for me. So the idea is that whenever you have in business, there's a bunch of theses that we have about how we can create value. Because at the end of the day, we get paid for the value we create. That's ultimately what business is. We're solving a problem, creating value for others, and they will show up and compensate us for that. I came from the toy business where every year you're reinventing your revenue streams because toys are fickle. Kids love them and then they don't. And so you're constantly reinventing and trying new things all the time. And it's also a very expensive business because there's hard tooling involved. You're building molds that, in several cases are hundreds of thousands of
Hmm.
dollars. So we had to become better at becoming more qualitative and quantitative about how we would actually go to market with products, particularly with technology as it
Hmm.
developed. Things like 3D printing and just using mediums like the internet and or groups that you can create cohorts where you can get feedback, and that's allowed you to take smaller risks, to take smaller bets, to try things. So the idea being fire a bullet and see if it lands, and if it does work, then unleash the cannon, right? And it's a series of small experiments, knowing that ultimately some are going to miss the mark. But when you do have one land, that's where you get the confirmation that you can go in and actually unleash those resources that you'd kept ready for exploiting the opportunity. And there's several examples in my experience in toys where we did just that. We try something, we'd be excited about it, we put together a test, and it didn't work. I mean, some of my favorite products never made it to market just because we didn't get those early reads that told us it was going to be
Yeah.
successful. But
Yeah.
we also saved ourselves millions of dollars and just lost time.
Is that does Butati fit into that category?
Well, actually, Butati is a perfect example of that.
uh, yeah, that's inside joke, but it is a great example, right, of something that you thought
Yeah.
had some potential and it didn't. I see this. I'll put it back, and so especially for advisors that listen, I'll see some of them. They see some new marketing idea that maybe someone else is doing, or someone's telling them is incredible, and they'll shift and like go all in on it and stop doing the things that they're doing that are working, then find out like,
Mm.
oh, that didn't really work like the person promised me it would. So I think just in any business, thinking about like, okay, how's a way for us to test this? Like you said, test out the thesis behind this, and if it works, great, then we go all in. But don't go all in before you know if it's going to work or not. So we've used that in so many ways in our business over the years. Of like, our team will want to think through like, well, what are all the different things that could possibly happen? I'm like, well, why don't we just test it in a really small way and see what actually happens? Then we can just figure it out from there. So
Yeah.
it's been super valuable, and I think for most business owners will be great advice. So it reminds John Maxwell. I've just said this so many times over the last few years when I heard him say it. It's a little different, but he said, I found like when I start walking, God starts working. And he said,
Mm,
sometimes you just got to take little steps and see like, hey, are those doors opening? Are the resources coming around it? So
totally.
you don't have to go all in right away. I guess is a better way to say that. So, um,
100%.
okay,
And you're
what?
going to,
Go
I was
ahead.
gonna
Yeah,
say, you're going to find out that most of them don't work, and that's
yeah,
okay. It's like fail fast, fail often, fail cheap. Like
yep.
you're trying to adopt a series. What you do want though is momentum to keep trying new things, exploring new opportunities, and discovering possibilities. That's the whole point of life.
It's good. One of the other key lessons in the book is centered around hiring and some of the lessons you've learned there, and that's just such
Mm.
a huge deal for every entrepreneur. Just talk to us about your new approach to hiring and some of the changes you made around that.
Well, again, the benefit of this group, obviously, we both met each other through Darren Hardy's course, and I would say that's had massive impact. Day
Mm,
3 of his BMC, which is about people and culture, is was super formative to how I built companies. In fact, I went home from my first BMC and I fired, I think, 2 or 3 people
mm,
within the week following because I just understood I was not doing things right and I
yep.
was focusing on the wrong things. Look, I would say between Darren's business master class, Brad Smart's book, Who, and Patrick Lencioni's The Ideal Team Player, we've created our own, what I would call gauntlet to get into our business. Because the one thing I'm clear on, as much as you want to hire the right people, it's more important to keep the wrong people out. And we as founders, entrepreneurs are optimists, particularly around opportunities and people.
Yep.
And the other thing is we like to hire people that we like, which are typically, not the people you need. So I created a system to protect me from myself. And we call it the rule of three, where any position in the company, we have a minimum of three candidates. They will go through a minimum of three interviews. And in fact, we have four interviews. We've made it even longer. There'll be three different people in the organization that interview them, if we have four different people. And finally, they have a minimum of three reference checks. And it takes time. In some cases, it's taken up to 90 days to get through a process with a person. But if your purpose of your business and your mission are sacred, which they should be, right? You have a sacred task in delivering the value you're creating to the marketplace, then it's up to you to protect that, to ensure that you get only the right people into the organization. And then as quickly as you can, remove the wrong people if they somehow get through, because they still get through, even with the rigor, they somehow still get through. And I know that you and I had this conversation at the retreat because you talked about how Dave Liniger had given you some counsel that impacted you. And I actually reference him in my book because that was the same counsel. He basically, when somebody asked him what was his greatest regret in business, and I was expecting it to be some deal I missed out on or whatever, his initial reaction was, I didn't fire people fast enough. And I was just kind of like, what? And he says, if you don't, there's like four people you're letting down. The first person is yourself, because you've lost trust in them. You can't give them tasks without, inspecting them and micromanaging them, because you just lost trust that they can actually deliver the result you're looking for. Second is you lost trust in the team around them, because the unsaid reality in the group is that you have a lower standard that you're tolerating. And in fact, you've now set a lower standard for everyone else as a result. So that's it. Third person is your family, because you're taking time away from them to micromanage this person. And then the final one, which blew me away, is you're letting that person down because they're really good and going to be great at something. It's just not with you. And you hanging on to them is protecting your ego and your lack of wanting to get into conflict. And the best thing you can do is release them back to the marketplace. And I would say that for me has been one of the most important dynamics I embraced 10 years ago when we met, Darren, that has transformed my business. Understanding there's no entitlement, no tenure. Everybody earns their seat at the table, because you can't win today's game with yesterday's home runs. And the people that got you to where you are aren't necessarily the people that get you where you're going. Yeah. So be willing to change out the team, because you want, at the end of the day, to have a winning team on the field.
So much wisdom in that, what you just shared. And I think for every entrepreneur, it's the biggest area of opportunity to improve. We made very similar changes after I went to that first business master class with Darren. One of the things that we had made the mistake of doing is I think we realized the three of us as founders weren't great at it for all the reasons that you just said, right? We're optimists by nature. Mm-hmm. So if someone smiled or showed up on time, we're like, they're going to be great, and we would hire them, or hired people like us. And that's not necessarily what we needed. The mistake that we made is when we hired a few people and put them in some leadership roles, we assumed they would be better at hiring than us. So we just turned all the hiring over to them, said, you hire the people. And lo and behold, they made the same mistakes we made. So putting some of those steps in place to make sure that you're getting a lot of different viewpoints and a lot of different candidates has been, we've probably hired over 1,000 people when you count some of the turnover since that time. And it's all those people go through, 4 steps. It's a long, drawn-out process, but it's helped us improve the quality and caliber of the people in a massive way. So a big part of that. Talk to me real quickly, change topic a little bit. You have 2 new companies that you're building and scaling right now. Just talk a little bit about those, what they are, what you're excited about with those 2, because I know we've just had a lot of conversations over those companies the last couple times we've been together.
Yeah. So I was a toy maker for 30 years. Loved what I did, actually. I enjoyed, you're bringing joy and happiness to kids, and toys are playful, and you remain playful as a result. It's just kind of fun to look at the world through kids' eyes. But I was somewhat conflicted about it. And the reason I was conflicted is I knew that most toys end up in landfill within 90 days. And people go, really? Like Barbies and Tonka? I don't know that that's true. And maybe your Barbie and Tonka does not, but most toys are those impulse things near the counter that the kids
Mm-hmm.
buy, they take home, they break, goes in the garbage, goes to landfill. And in general, this the consumer economy that we've created in the Western world is very much a make, take, use, waste. The end of life is not actually designed into the beginning. So when I exited the toy business and I was told I couldn't be in toys for a few years, I had a chance to reimagine what I wanted to do when I grew up. And I landed on a few principles. And one of those principles was only impact, work on things that matter. And I'd like to believe that it could matter into generations that, I will never know or see. And so I started thinking about this problem, and along came an opportunity to invest into a company who was making compostable, biodegradable phone cases. And at first blush, it doesn't seem like an important problem to solve, except for that every year there's $20 billion worth of phone cases sold. And like, really? $20 billion? It's like, yeah, people change up their devices every 2 to 3 years. And the case that you had on your own phone doesn't work on the new phone. So you've got to get a new case. And so the problem was that the founder who started it knew how to develop the compound, but didn't know how to market it. So he had brought in my business partner and Matt, who was our CEO, and he's an incredible marketer. And he was now marketing and telling the story, and it was scaling, but it kept breaking. They didn't know how to manufacture and scale it. Well, I had some experience in doing that. So as a third partner, I came in to really provide expertise around connecting them into ways that we can scale it in a meaningful way. Fast forward to 2, 3 years, we're selling millions of these things around the planet, and we're getting people shipping them back to us. And we're like, why are you sending back your case? Well, I'm done with it, and now I want you guys to give it the end of life. And we're like, well, just put it into your home composting bin. And people are like, well, I don't have one. Well, put it into your industrial composting bin. Well, we don't have that either. Or if they did, the industrial composter doesn't take compostable plastics. So we realized that, okay, there's a bigger problem here. We're missing the compostable infrastructure. So we started working on a solution for that. And that's how we came up with Lomi. And along the way, we discovered there's even a bigger problem that, so if compostable cases can go in because it's organic, so can food. And as it turns out, as I was naive, I thought, food goes into your garbage, that goes to landfill, and that's fine because it breaks down. Well, actually, it's not fine because food going to landfill goes in plastic bags that's then typically covered by earth at the landfill, and it breaks down anaerobically. And what that does is it creates methane gas, and methane gas is like 80 times more potent than CO2 as a greenhouse gas emission. So, in the process of solving the case problem, we realized, hey, there's a bigger problem, a food problem. And so Lomi became the world's first, electronic kitchen composter that turns all organic waste into a nutrient-rich soil supplement that is a superfood for plants. And then the unexpected grade of all that is that we turned out that the output sequesters carbon. So not only are we diverting methane gas by putting it into the Lomi, but what comes out not only is good for plants, but actually pulls carbon in the atmosphere. And we are within a few weeks of being a verified carbon asset and will be the most scalable climate tech solution on the planet today.
It's cool. Give people the website so they can go check it out. It's super slick, right? Just sits there on your countertop and throws stuff in, and out comes this rich soil.
That's it. Yep. So it's lomi.com, Lomi.com. And yep. You'll see videos, you'll see all kinds of science, and most importantly, the customer reviews that people who use it love it.
Yeah. Okay, I want to ask you one final question before we jump into some lightning round questions, which is it is kind of related to business, but one of the things that I've admired about you, and honestly, a lot of the guys that are in our group, is their focus on being a great husband and father, as well as a great, business owner, entrepreneur. But just any tips that you can share with busy entrepreneurs on how to keep their family prioritized while building, scaling, and leading a business?
Yeah. Look, this is something that is a work in progress.
For all of us.
But there are a few things I've learned along the way. And, what you value is where you invest your time. And for a large part of my life, I said I valued my family, I valued my faith, my fitness. But the truth is, if you looked at my calendar, that's not true. I wasn't investing the time. And ultimately, your time and your attention with your time, the little nuance, are your most precious resources. You can't make more of it. You're never getting it back, right? It's where you can invest it once, and that's your choice. And So I came to realize that I was out of integrity with how I was showing up and saying, these are the things I value, but I wasn't actually investing my most precious resource into that. And what you value becomes valuable. That's the bottom line. So relationships with your family are not going to just happen, they're intentional. Um, I've come to learn that the opposite of love is not hate, it's apathy and indifference. And that relationships just don't, there's not like one grand event that suddenly caused their demise. It's a slow neglect and drift over time. They say that most marriages, divorce happens in the first 5 years. And then after that, within 18 months of when the kids leave home. And in both cases, it's because in between, the husband and wife did not take the time to invest into the relationship to keep it malleable. So my wife and I, we go through a practice that I think has been super valuable for us. First of all, we have a date night every week. That's, once in a while we have to reschedule it, but we always make up for it. So every Wednesday we go on a date night. She plans 1 week, I plan the other week. We take turns. It's a surprise to the other person, which is kind of part of the fun. Like, I don't know what's going to happen. She's got something planned, but it's always exciting, a new restaurant or a new recipe or something like that. And that's just meant to be just time together over a bottle of wine, enjoying it. But the more impactful one has been every Sunday morning, we have a non-negotiable walk that we go on. And during that time, we reflect on the week and we self-evaluate on how we showed up as a husband, a father, a lover, and a provider. And for her, it's exactly the same, except for she's the homemaker. And we talk about what worked, what didn't work, and what we're thinking about for the week ahead. But most importantly, before we even get to that, we start with gratitude. We talk about what we're grateful for the week, the things that worked out, the things that we look forward to that are ahead, because a mind grounded in gratitude is going to think about abundance versus scarcity, and we want to make sure we're framing everything there. And then we give each other the opportunity to provide feedback. But it's feedback that is meant to be uplifting to support versus trying to pull down. And what I would say is, again, we haven't got it perfect, but it's something that we have felt has really helped deepen our relationship. And we will be 30 years marriage this year. And quite frankly, she probably should have hit the eject button several times, particularly when the bank came to collect the house. But she stuck around, and that's probably the greatest blessing in my life.
That's cool. I appreciate you sharing that. I've heard you share it, but I know the audience is not. So, okay, let's jump into these lightning round questions. Can be quick answers, whatever first kind of comes to your mind. So first one is this. I think since going back to COVID, a lot of people have reevaluated things. Is there a lesson that you've learned over these past few years that you feel like you're going to carry forward for the rest of your career or life?
Man, the power of leverage. Talked about the 1-3-1 principle already, but the idea that the problem is you can't replicate yourself. And there's 4 ways you can leverage yourself, through your community, your cash, code, or content. So pick ways that you can leverage yourself. And I know since you're someone who's in finance, you appreciate that leverage as well as having compounding returns is very powerful.
Yep, that's great. Okay, you've mentioned Jim Collins a few times. So what is the one thing that you did that graduated you from being a good leader to a great leader?
Ask better questions. And that's part of the leverage, right? Stop feeling like I need to have all the answers and ask questions like, what needs to be true for this idea to work? Or what would easy look like? I find those to be really good questions to ask. Question.
Yeah, I love that. Okay. Obviously, we're coming off our time together, which is part of our personal growth that both of us practice. But is there something new you're doing this year to drive your personal growth and development that you're excited about?
Well, I'm not very flexible. And so I felt a little bit of guilt, particularly as I've now turned 50. I know you're still young, but since I've turned 50, I recognize they say it's your fix at 50. So I need to build flexibility into my routine. And I also needed to build some time in prayer and meditation. And I don't really enjoy doing both of those things, but somehow when I put them together, it works. So every morning I spend 15 minutes in prayer, meditation, and stretching. And I'm starting to see the benefits all across the board.
That's cool. Yeah, really good. Okay. Can't be your book, but what is the one book that you've recommended most to other entrepreneurs?
Oh, so look, I think books are prescriptive for what you need. So I'm going to
For
say
sure.
this, okay? If a person is in a startup phase of a business, I would say like Darren's compound effect is probably first come to mind.
Yep.
If someone's in the scaling phase, I think the Seven Habits of Highly Effective People by Stephen Covey is one I would go back to. I have gone back to recently, and I think it's one of the best books ever written. And for somebody who's in succession, who maybe has a sustainable business and is thinking about succession, the book you recommended, From Strength to Strength by Arthur Brooks,
Yeah.
full of wisdom.
Yep. It's so good. Love all three great recommendations. And you're very right. Book is, I tell people that, what are you wanting to learn more about? And I'll tell you what book I would recommend. So, okay, final question. Best piece of advice you've ever received?
My dad, he told me that in life you're going to pay one of two prices:
Mm,
the price of discipline or the price of regret. The price of discipline is going to cost you something, it is going to weigh ounces. But the price of regret, it weighs tons and will crush you under its weight.
mm.
And those words haunted me so much so that I wrote it out in a picture frame and had it next to my bed. So when my alarm went off at 7 a.m. and I'd rather roll over than roll out, I would read those words and it got me going.
That's good. Well, I know I told you this just a few days ago when we were together, but even the kind of opening credit that you gave to your dad, that was not the only great wisdom he gave you. So people should go pick up the book, Secret Santa, because they're just even in that first few pages, right? There were three or four great things that he taught you and wisdom he imparted on you. So pick up your book. But Brad, obviously, thanks for the time. But for people who want to keep in touch, connect with you, learn more about you, Lomi, Pila, some of those, what's the best way for them to do that?
Yeah, I gave you the Lomi website already, so I encourage you to go check that out. Pelacase.com is where we make the compostable phone cases as well. If you want to learn about me, you can go to my website, bradpedersen.com. I've got a bunch of resources and things you can click on if you're interested in growing and developing as a leader. And then for the book, you can go to startupsantabook.com and actually download the first chapter for free. Just give you a taste of what to expect in the book. And I did a number of videos with my spiritual mentor, VJ, and I think we really get in behind the scenes and talk about some of the meaning and deeper layers to the story. So it was a lot of fun.
It's awesome. So everyone should go download that. Just pick up the book in general. I'm not all the way through. I told him because you finally gave me a hard copy here. So I did some reading at night though after we went to bed. So it's going to be awesome to get through over these next week or two. So hey everyone, if you enjoyed this, go share it with someone that you know would benefit from this. Brad has so much wisdom as an entrepreneur. I'm so glad that I got to introduce him to this larger audience. He's been a great friend to me over the past decade now almost. So share this. And as I always say, our world needs great leaders more than ever today. So go be great. Brad, my friend, thank you.
Cody, so awesome. Appreciate you so much. And I've learned so much from you and inspired by the way you live your life.
Thank you, buddy. Till our next meeting.